This series of short videos is sponsored by the Kentucky Rifle Foundation to share the knowledge and research of select Kentucky Rifle Association members.
Good afternoon. Hello. Welcome to a non-traditional topic for the KRA annual meeting. My name's Craig, and I was asked by a number of spouses between last meeting and this meeting if I would talk about what the heck do I do with my spouse's collection. You know, he tells me it's not worth much, but I just don't believe him. So, so what was interesting is I'm in a couple other, like we all are, different collecting groups, and the ladies were organized, and the president of the ladies group called me and just said, we would like to do a presentation to talk about collections. And I said, well, what do you want to talk about? And he says, well, not so much the mechanics of how do I sell it, but I don't know what the heck this stuff is. I don't know what it's worth. My husband doesn't want to talk about it, or he just kind of stays at a very high level. And of course, I'm thinking of all the conversations I've had with my wife, and it sounds very similar. And so I said, well, send me a list of 9 or 10 questions, and I will design a program to answer those questions. So we tested this out. We had a meeting in Mobile, Alabama, and I tested it out. And my goal was to talk for 30 to 45 minutes, not get into the weeds of tax and all that kind of stuff, but really to talk more about the family dynamic and some of the issues that I see pop up. So I'm a lawyer, obviously. I'm a tax lawyer, and because when people come into my law firm, they see that I'm on a corner, and when you walk down there, it's got glass walls, and they see this giant figure in there, and then they realize it's a suit of armor. Then they see a World War II propeller hanging from my ceiling, and they start seeing some swords and pistols and cannonballs. So they already know I'm different. I'm a different cat. And so with all the estate planning lawyers, they'll come in and say, hey, you know, our client is concerned about his collection. Can you talk to him about it? Sure. And so I started getting that professionally. So I started thinking about the issues. And then when the ladies group from the American Society had reached out, I said, let me design one. And they enjoyed it. I didn't get too many heat rounds from the collectors of the group. Afterwards, I said, no, you did the necessary evil, and we know it's good for someone to bring that issue up. And so then after last meeting, some of the ladies approached me about, hey, what about, what do I do with this stuff, you know? And I told her about the program I did. I said I can tweak it a little bit and try to make it more focused. But I said, here's kind of the issues I see, and she liked that, and so that's what we're going to do. If you haven't picked up when you came in, I do have a small article. It's on either side of the chairs as you come in. Take one, just please take all of them so I don't have to lug them home. But it's designed to, I don't want you to have to worry about taking notes and all that stuff. Everything I'm going to talk about is covered in there. So you've got stuff with footnotes and all that kind of stuff. So I really am hoping this is going to be a conversation. So I'm not bashful. So if issues pop up, you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Obviously, I'm here for the duration. So if you see me in the room afterwards, you can corner me, ask me all the questions you want. But I did come up with the name for this because my wife happened to be in the audience when I presented this in Mobile. And of course, she's the first person that stands up with her hands up and said, why haven't you done any of the stuff you're talking about? And you know, you can't, now you got to think this thing through, right? Okay, that's my wife of 42 years. Okay, I got to be nice. I say, well, honey, I'm working on it. And she goes, you said that last year. So I want to tell you that I am as culpable as, or more culpable than probably anyone in this room. It's just hard because when you start taking out your collection, and we'll talk about some of the stuff, but I say, okay, I need to write a description because my wife does not collect. As she tells me, my crap is all over the house. Every square inch is covered with paintings and drawings and tapestries and all that. And I said, well, that's because I'm Cornish. And I said, you know, we don't, any piece of real estate on a wall, Okay. Any piece of real estate in wall disease needs to be covered up with something, a picture, a photograph, a sword, something. And my wife is a minimalist. She collects ideas. And so, you know, we have these conversations, but I do start to talk about it from time to time. And then once you pick up something, you start studying, and you're making, oh, I'll write a good description, take the photographs. Then you want to play with it. Next thing you know, what's supposed to be take 10 or 15 minutes is 2 hours later. You're just like, oh, this is really, you know. And so it never ends. So now that I'll be working towards retirement in the next couple years, I've promised my wife I'm going to focus, I'm going to get it. I've even got some ideas I'm going to talk about that are going to blow my mind, like the online inventory system. I have promised myself I will learn it. I will learn how to do it. I will learn how to manage it. I will teach my wife so she knows, who's a heck of a lot smarter than me, who probably already knows how to do it. But my fear is if something happened to me, we don't have children. We're not able to have children. And my wife doesn't understand the collection. So you kind of see what we're going to be talking about today. So, but you see my problem. This is the problem we have. And every one of us in a room has faced this issue. And in my family, it's become almost a daily conversation because my wife wants to know, well, what have you done in the last 2 days towards resolving this issue? And of course, I said, well, honey, I'm working, I'm running around. She goes, yeah, I've heard that. What are you doing about fixing this problem? So, and my wife is a pit bull, as she needs to be, and so I have promised her. And so I want to start with putting us, let's go back into a friendly setting. We're all sitting at a gun show, a military show, the KRA meeting, and you're sitting down with your buddies, and you're looking around the room, and you probably see what I see. White hair, no hair, and so we always talk about how are we going to get young people involved and interested in the collections. And you know, some of my folks say, well, you know, my son sort of liked it, but he's not really into it. I'm hoping his kids, the grandkids, will be interested, but we don't know yet. They're too young to know. And another one says, well, I already know, you know, my kids have no interest in it at all. I think they're might interested, but they probably would rather have money so they can put their kids through college or something like that. And so I just kind of listened as we watched lots of white-haired folks wander by. And every once in a while, we would see a young person. We got excited. You know, young as anything under 50. You know, so, and really excitement is when you see someone 15, 20, 25 with their father or the grandparent. I love to see that because then I'm seeing, now there's someone who's investing in their family to teach them something, whether it's history or what, this is what made Pa or Grandpa so interested in this stuff. And so, but I don't see enough of that. I really don't. And I know that a lot of organizations, whether it's collecting or whether it's any kind of interest, have the same ideas. I think our society has sort of changed. Kids would rather play with some type of video game instead of actually, or look up, oh, I can see that on the internet. I don't need to go into the museum and see it. Where I'm saying, well, let's just go over. Let's go for a battlefield walk. Why? You can do here's a tour on the video. So, and so part of it is I probably don't communicate very well with that because I'm still going to drag them out on a battlefield or I'm still going to make them go see it because I want them to touch it and feel it and hear someone who maybe has a passion about something and see if it's like. So at my office, we have staff day where you can bring your family in, your spouse in. Do that every 3 or 4 months. And so in my office, I have a 8-inch Civil War mortar ball that's cut in half. And it's empty like a bowl because it used to have shrapnel. And I filled up with mini balls and round balls, Union, Confederate, early 18th century. And they all want to come down because they want to see the suit's armor, they want to see the sword, they want to see the propeller. And they look at this thing, and you know they're all covered with white corrosion. You know, this stuff it means it's old, it's been in the ground. And I said, do you know what that is? Well, can I throw it at someone? Well, yeah, but please don't do that. You know, people would not be happy with me, and they have to take it home. But I said that came off of. I live in Richmond, Virginia. He said, well, that came off of Cold Harbor, which is just outside of Richmond. And I said that one there, and I plopped it. That's a Union mini ball. And that's a Richmond Confederate mini. And I said, go ask your mom if you can have those. I'll give them to you. And so what I try to do is I give them to see if I whet an appetite. Now, again, we're talking kids that are probably 8 to 15, but you never know what's going to flip a switch. And again, for me, I'm trying to get people excited about it. I'm trying to let my staff know that you're important to me, your family's important to me, and they need to understand I'm wired a little different than a lot of people, but I'm very passionate, and usually I can convey that to folks. So as I was developing this program before, I kept coming back to those words because I don't have an answer. I got a lot of potential answers, but I don't have the definitive answer. So I've come up with a series of questions or issues, and the genesis was from the original email I got with the set of questions from some of the spouses of collectors. And what I really wanted to do is I boiled it down to priority. And for me, the first priority is communication. Right? We can all walk and talk. Right? That's not a problem. But you also put your thinking cap on. So for me, of course, I couldn't understand why everyone wouldn't think that this Virginia manufacturing musket is cool, or this Kentucky long rifle is cool, and if you should love it like I love it. I mean, there's no other way of thinking about it, right? And sometimes, like when I have those conversations with my wife, the eyes glaze over, and she's like, okay, and so I think I got to empty the dishwasher or something like that, and off she goes. So obviously I was not communicating very effectively, but the issue I want to kind of top out there is issue number one is you do have to speak and talk with your spouse. And I'm as guilty as anyone. Because I'll tell you a true story. She's heard it now because I was telling my buddy and I didn't realize she was behind me. But I love everything. I mean, my collecting interests go from 1500 to probably 1865, but it's really more heavily earlier. But I also think World War I and World War II is really cool. My dad's a World War II vet, disabled vet, and so I've always I lived over Europe. I used to go on the battlefields. I just loved it. Learned World War I through the Canadian Air Force with their historian. We were stationed in Mons, Belgium for 3 years, and they do a lot of training, and so I said, I'll be your token American. I just tagged along. It was just a blast. I learned much more than I ever learned in high school, and when I went to college, I wanted to be a history major. My dad made it pretty clear the first day he dragged me out of the Arts and Science College and took me over to the School of Management and said, look, bells don't go to college, so you're the first. You're going to get something that you can get a job in. So you're going to be an accountant. And he deposited me in a business school and went back to Buffalo. I was at Syracuse, and I took the first semester. I absolutely hated it. So immediately I transferred into finance, which I thought was good. I enjoyed finance. As I like to tell my buddies, I like to make history, not record history. And then I ended up, I'm a tax lawyer, and that was really dumb luck. But I think a lot. And when I started talking with my wife, who I readily admit is much smarter than me, and she's asked good questions, but she's also a client. So she works for a utility company that's one of our larger clients in Richmond called Dominion Energy, big utility. And so she's in our building all the time with the energy lawyers and regulatory lawyers and all that, and she'll pop by if she's in the building and say, hey, thought I'd say hi, that kind of thing. And she came by one day and looked in the office, and in the corner was a very giant World War II propeller just hanging against the wall. Hadn't mounted it yet in the roof of my office. She didn't say a word, but I do remember about a week earlier, she said, you got to stop buying stuff. There's no room in the house. You can't clean the house because your crap's under every single bed, every single client, and you got a full walk-up attic. And I said, well, yeah, but it's not climate controlled, honey. Well, you should have fixed that problem. I said, well, it's a little late now. But I hear that conversation usually once to twice a week. Usually when she says, well, I need to vacuum or something, and then she remembers, oh yeah, there's like 10 sword cases under the bed, and she gets frustrated. She won't move them. She's like, you do it, which is the right answer. You do it, But anyway, she didn't say a thing, and I'm thinking, oh, I survived. She didn't pull me out. And so that weekend, my Saturday morning ritual is, and this is more than you probably want to know about me, but I work long hours during the week, but if I do that, I don't like to work weekends if I don't have to. Saturday morning, I sleep in, so I get up at 6. I go down and make a big old pot of Sumatra coffee. I like really strong black coffee. You know, if you live in Germany, Italy, Greece, you learn to drink strong black coffee. And I get caught up on my Wall Street Journals, my Man-at-Arms, all my magazines. And she just knows I need 2-3 hours just to read, not to talk to him. And we lost, so I used to have 2 schnauzers. Unfortunately, they're both gone now, but they would pop up and they would hang out with Daddy while he's reading and drinking coffee. And that's how I started Saturday morning. And usually what I would ask her is there anything I have to do today? And if she says no, I'm a happy guy. So like, well, I can just bum around the house. I can maybe go out later and have a cigar and a bourbon or something like that. But she says, well, when she came down, I'm all happy, and she goes, I'm going to divorce your butt. Whoa, what? She said, I thought I told you to stop buying stuff. I said, well, what are you talking about? She goes, well, when I was in your office, I saw that giant propeller hanging in a corner, and I told you not to buy it. It's like, honey, I've had that. I got that last year. This was January 2nd, and I got it December 28th. So I was telling that to the guys as we're sitting around having a bourbon and a cigar, and my wife kind of came up and she just gave me that look like, yeah, I'm a dead man. So now she asks really good questions. So the old, how much did you pay for that? Oh, I don't remember, I've had that. That's not going to work for me, Craig. And so she can be a pit bull. And as I thought about it, I said, Craig, you need to grow up and start telling your wife, because if something happens to me, I don't want her to think that everything, I got everything for $1,000 when it might be $100,000. I just, because I have to protect her because she has no interest in it. So I need to have the records. I need to have the purchase invoice. If I've had it appraised, I need to have a copy appraised. I need to have a photographs. I do have insurance, so I have that stuff because I have to get it from the insurance company. I just haven't put it into a really nice, I was doing it the old school way where you had a binder for every single item, and you just put stuff in as you do research. Oh, that's good, I'll put that in a binder. Well, the binders fill up 4 closets, and I've decided I have to digitalize that, and I have to get it so it's searchable. And then I need to put it in an organization, and I've also had no numbers on anything, the nice little tags. So for Christmas, my wife bought me little brass tags, and it says Bell 1, Bell 2, and it goes up to like 600. And she goes, use those. I want to see that collection inventoried, numbered. I want to know where it is, and tell me where you keep the stuff. So I'm on number 12 of 600. As you can tell, it's been 2 years now. She, when I go home and I joke, I put the key in the door and I turn it open, so I figure I'm allowed to live. But in all fairness, I'm not being fair to my wife. I'm not respecting her concern. And so I'm putting that out for those of you who are collectors, and like I said, I'm as guilty as they come, but I don't want to be guilty. I love my wife. I don't want her to be unhappy or concerned. House burns, what happens? Do you have insurance? And so I go get the policy and say, here, it's all listed, and this stuff is scheduled and all that. And she says, okay, do you have another copy? Yeah, it's at the office. Just call Susan. She can find everything there, and that's my assistant. But that was the start of issue 1 communication. So the issues that I want to point out to you is, and I'm going to assume that everybody here is a collector or a spouse of a collector, so they know whether you like it or not, it's in the house, it's going to be in the house, and of course, as I've told my wife, I don't tend to die, so why do I need to worry about it? And she gives me that look. And so I do have to be serious about it. And when she wants to know what is the value of the collection, I kind of have that dumbass look, the confounded look, and say, it's a big number. And she goes, well, show me. And then she would, let's go up into this room here. And she said, I collect Virginia Manufacturing Store. I live in Richmond. I look out on the old site. And she said, I counted, you had 43 Virginia Manufacturing swords. Craig, they all look the same. They're all cavalry. They are all identical. I said, well, no, not really, honey. You see, this is a first model. This has a screw for a pommel. This one is slightly curved. And you see how that goes to, and she's looking at me like, you're a Martian. You know, and she goes, do you really need to have 43 of the same thing? And I'm trying to say, well, it's a research collection. I'm always being contacted by people who send me pictures, and I can say, okay, that's an Arsenal Slim, that's a clip point, that's an amateur, that's a War of 1812 model duration, this is a post. And she goes, yeah, but what if something happens to you? How am I supposed to know that? Do you have it written down? And I just go, she goes, and if you're in the ground, what good is that? And so everything I'm telling you to do, I am guilty of not doing, but I want to do it. I'm forcing myself to do it because I don't want my wife to be uncomfortable about it, which meant we had to have some real conversations when I would pull out something. And the way of course, you know, I try to be a little slick. I say, at the breakfast table when you're kind of waking up, and I'd put some pictures in front of her and say, what do you think of that? And she's like, oh, those are actually kind of cool. And it was a pair of Kentucky pistols, over-under barrels, made by Simon Lauk, presented by William Benjamin Harrison to Duncan MacArthur. That's Douglas MacArthur's grandfather, who won the War of 1812 Western Theater. And I told her, these are probably, Wallace, I don't know if Wallace is still here, defined as the very finest pair of Kentucky pistols ever made in North America, is how he described it. I don't know if that's accurate, but he likes anything Virginia, and I was going with that. And I looked at him, and I said, uh-oh, oh, help. See, I was talking and not paying attention. But and I showed the picture and said, what do you think of these? And she looked at them for a minute, and she goes, those are really remarkable. Now, that was news to me, because my wife doesn't like the collection, but she said, look at that silver inlay, look at that engraved carbon, look at the flamed maple, and how does that system work? One cock, one flash pan, two barrels, not rotating. How does that work? And I was explaining it to her. And she goes, it really is amazing. And I said, they're available. And she's like, oh, how much? And I told her. And my wife, who never swears, I did hear some words I'm not used to hearing, like, are you effing nuts? You know, that's more than the house, blah, 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 blah. And I said, so does that mean no? You know, and she looked at me and says, that means no. That's the first time I ever had a conversation, thank you, with my spouse before I bought something. Because, you know, we're all the addiction. It's easier to beg for forgiveness after you've already done the damage. But that was my first step in maturation, to have the conversation. And she shot me down. And so we're sitting there drinking coffee, and, you know, I'm probably like, you know, peanuts, Pigpen, you know, and she said, it's just a lot of money, Craig. I said, well, I have an idea. What if I got with a few other folks, and we each kicked in 25% of it, and then it just visited each house 3 months here, 3 months here, 3 months. I said, what do you think of that? And she said, that's still a lot of money for 25%, but these are truly remarkable. And while I'm not into guns and swords and all that, even though she's a military veteran, she just said, they are gorgeous. And I took that as a green light, so I immediately went out and acquired them. And I did get a partner, because I never lie. There's one thing, I do not lie. I might not answer the question right away, but I will not lie to my spouse. It's bedrock of my marriage is to always be honest. And so I did get a partner. So when she then went out to, I don't know what she was going to do something, and I was sitting there, and at that time, Laszlo, my miniature Schnauzer, was sitting on we have benches sitting next to me, kind of leaning me while I'm drinking coffee, and I pull out a dollar bill, and I put it in front of Laszlo. I pick his paw, put his paw on the dollar bill, and I said, Laszlo, how would you like to be a partner and co-owner of these pistols? And Laszlo's like, you know, giant ears sticking, looks like a burrow head, you know, for a Schnauzer. Her ears don't flop up, they stay up. And just a sweetie. And I said, okay, well, let me take that dollar back, and you now have ownership interest. And so obviously I bought the pistol. So I'm sitting here maybe 5 or 6 years later. I'm at a meeting and if we're going out and we're having a little bourbon and cigars outside, my wife will come and sit. She likes the people and enjoys the conversation. We get some spouses out there, and most of the time I'm just drinking water. But I enjoy the friendship and the camaraderie. So didn't realize she had popped out. So I was describing that story, and you can see where this is going. And when I'm done, everyone's laughing, and then they're all looking at me, then looking here, and finally the light goes on. I look around and she goes, "I never knew that." And I was like, this is going to be a long drive home. But so it's in our human nature when you spend a lot of money that you really don't, and your spouse may not be as enthusiastic in the support, that there's a tendency not to want to tell them, at least not right away. We're not intentionally obfuscating, we're just forgetful. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a closet and found a pistol and a sock that I bought 2 years ago and I forgot about it because I didn't know when I could pull it out and put it in the gun room before she would notice something new. When I started getting into early 16th century two-handed swords, those monster swords, you put that in the sword rack, it stands out, right? All the other swords are here, and this one's, almost 6.5 feet tall. She noticed that and says, "We need to chat." And so what now I do is I do bring up major purchases with her before. I sort of know what the answer is, but we've got a detente, and the detente is, "Craig, I trust your judgment. You're not going to buy junk, or you're not intentionally going to buy junk. You know that I'm not a fan of how you spend the money on this stuff, but I do see the joy it brings you, and I do like the friends, your collective friends you've met, and I like their families, and I don't get drunk, I don't do drugs, I don't run out." I said, I work too much, and my relief is the collection, and to hang out with other collectors. And it could be, no matter what you want to talk about, that's fine with me. I can get as excited about someone talking about what brings them joy, even it might not be what I collect, because I enjoy, because we all have been there in our separate genres. And so my wife said, "I get that. And so you know what, if you would just promise me you will never touch our retirement assets, from the pension plans and all that stuff. You won't stick a mortgage on the house to buy something." And I said, "Well, I can't do that because you'd have to sign that. And then you would know, and so where would the surprise element be?" And I said, "No, I would never do that." I said, "If I buy a big ticket item, I'll try to work it out where I have a couple months to shake the money tree somewhere and find it and buy it." But I now discuss that. And I'll be honest with you, I feel much more relieved because I don't want to. And so when I talk about communication, that's the first step. The second thing is, my wife says, "What are we going to do if something happens to you with the collection?" And she's not talking about run it all down to the auction company. She's like, "I don't know what this stuff is. I don't know what's valuable." She was looking at two pistols. I had a Rappafort's pistol and I had a Marshall pistol, Flint, nice. The Rapp was all beat up and the other one's all pretty and all that. And she goes, "Well, that one must be pretty special." And I said, "Well, they're both special to me," but I then described the values of them, and I got one of those looks and there may have been a word or two that I won't repeat, of unhappiness but I said, "Well, I didn't incur debt for it." I said, and I bought it below value because the gentleman that owned it wanted it to come back to Virginia. And he was a billionaire, he didn't care, and he just wanted to have a good home. And that's what started planting the seed about what do I want to do with my collection. I have a lot of friends, and because I don't have children, I want to give a lot of these things to people that I think will really treasure them if they've shown an interest in it. And then the rest, we'll talk about museums. I'm all over the place in museums. They scare the heck out of me now. The Virginia Historical Society, which is now the Virginia Museum of Arts and Culture, Material Arts and Culture, I thought would be where my Virginia manufacturers would go because the site is in downtown Richmond. But after changing of the guards and what's the current issue du jour, and I've just realized that it'll sit in a warehouse and never seen, and it's too much value in history to be sitting gathering dust. So I'm now paying more attention, what do I do with it? And remember how we started this. There aren't a lot of younger folks that are getting into this. So I don't have an answer for you. That's the conundrum. But it's the start of communication. What I have found when I've talked to my friends that are collectors that have children and grandchildren is I think I've got one son who thinks this stuff is pretty cool. He's got a couple young kids, but I know that he's focused more about making sure he's safe for college and they have access to do things, as opposed to having it tied up in a few pistols and rifles that he may like, but he realizes that's probably his priority at his age type is not in his priority. And what I'm suggesting to you all is, as the collector and the spouse of the collector, to do what my wife does with me, is they have those conversations, because you can't force this on the next generation if they don't want it, because what will happen will just get flogged at an auction and the family will get screwed. Not that the auction is doing it, but the auction business their business is to sell things. And they're very good at selling things, whether it's a high price or low price, it's sold. And I have a dear friend who passed away, had a humongous collection. I mean, we're talking several thousand long rifles and swords. And it all got dumped into 2 auctions in 3 months, and it had a large amount of Virginia manufacturers, which is one of my areas I like. And I was buying, $15,000 muskets for $2,000 to $3,000 a pop. And I literally went to my bank. I'm a chairman of a bank, and I said, I need a credit line for this amount. And here's my, and I was prepared to spend it all because I thought these were really great items. And I was getting stuff at 25% because Virginia manufacturers, they're passionate collectors, but it's a narrow market. It's not like U.S. Marshals where it's lots of people. But I start thinking about Kentucky's. We're passionate about our Kentucky's, but is it a deep market? Or if someone goes and drops 1 or 2 large dollar items, that pretty much takes them out for the rest of the auction, maybe for the next couple auctions. And so by putting everything in one auction and getting those prices knocked down, what did you do for your family? You don't blame the auction company. They did what they're supposed to do, which is to sell it. You blame you, now the decedent, or the person who can't say it, is, why didn't you have a plan? Why didn't you have things mapped up? Why didn't you communicate with your spouse to say, if this happens, I would break, these things should go to Christie's, these things should go to one of the firearm auction companies. This stuff probably goes to a Pook and Pook, or one that's really good with maybe antique furniture or regional type things. You need to do that. Well, then you need to do that and then explain it to your spouse or to your children who may or may not even live with you because they're in their jobs or jobs around the country, and they're not paying attention to that until they come visit for Christmas or Thanksgiving or something like that. So I'm just trying to raise the consciousness. Oh, yeah. And so that's what I'm talking about, communications. What we as the collector want doesn't necessarily happen. Even if your spouse says, I want to honor your wishes, but if the kids aren't really there, how many of you have antique china and silver that you got from grandma and grandpa, and how many times do you use it a year? Right? I think ours sits in a closet. It's been there for years. I mean, I like it because it was grandma, and I love grandma. But we're just not formal people. I can be just as happy eating off a paper plate. I really don't care, as long as the food is good, But how do they know what should be sold, what should be given, what should be gifted, if anything? And so you have to kind of do that triage. And so the triage, what I'm suggesting is have the meaningful conversation with your spouse. If you have adult children who are familiar with the collection, which I suspect almost all of you will have, invite them and have that discussion with you. You're not there to judge them. You want their honest opinion. Do you like this collection? Is there anything in particular that says, that would be cool? I know that was Dad's. He really liked that. I would just like that one pistol. Well, what about the other 99? But you need to know that. And just because they show an interest when they're 15, that interest may not be there when they're 25 because they now have young children. And they're spending money on sporting events and dancing lessons and all that kind of stuff. So we have to kind of be in tune with the family, and as I say, that's very, very important. The other thing you have to be honest with, and I'm much better now, is being truthful with your spouse about what you pay for this stuff. Now, I'll just be honest, if you're like me, I knew there were heat rounds coming in. As a retired Army guy, I know what it's like when artillery from the bad guys comes in and you know how to take cover. And I just wasn't expecting that maybe at my house. But it needed to happen for me to grow up and have that conversation and for them to understand. Because the other thing is like, well, honey, I have an estate plan. The lawyer will deal with that. As a lawyer, as a collector lawyer, I get it. But 99.9% of lawyers know nothing about collectibles, don't want to know anything about collectibles, and their answer to everything is just flog it, get rid of it, and be gone. It's a pain. We like to deal with marketable securities and real estate and stuff. That's what they like to do. They don't know how to handle collections, no matter what, whether it's Hummels, china, silver, antique furniture, coin silver, you name it. The lawyers, they just want to find someone who can take it and make it go away and get the best value you can. And that may or may not be the smartest thing. So when you're thinking, when you sit down with your lawyer and talk to them, if you have that stuff, it's much more effective if you have an inventory, you have at least what I paid for it when I bought it and a sense of what it's valued or what you have it insured for. It's not going to pass muster with the IRS, but it lets you pass muster so that your advisors know what you need, because they're supposed to design something that works for you, right? Not for the lawyer, it needs to work for you, the client. And so, anyway, I hate to say it, but you know what happens, and knock on wood, I'm driving home tomorrow back down to Virginia, and you know I have a car accident. I have a stroke in the car, I get hit, I have a heart attack, I die, or I'm comatose. What have I just done to my wife with my collection? And now for us, I mean, my collection is a large collection. I like pretty, I like nice, but I'm not at that point where my wife would say, well, here's the plan he had. And so I'm just saying, you know, sometimes the worst thing is if you have a stroke or you have something you can't communicate and you can't convey this knowledge. So you, the collector, are the person. You are the linchpin. You are the people, the keeper of the knowledge, and you have to get this written down and communicated so your family knows what to do. You know, I always get by, well, you know, for the old stuff, you call this person, I trust them, they'll help advise you on it. For this stuff here, you call this person. You know, that's you can survive that day with your spouse of that conversation, but I haven't solved the problem. And so, you notice I'm giving you questions and issues, but I'm not answering them, right? Because these are the things you have to work out with your spouse, your family. So with that is what we call the big collection, the big issue. This is the typical fact pattern is that conversation I've seen. You have someone who's worked really hard, they've been raising the kids, they've got a good job, they get to the point, and maybe you have your own business, you sell the business, I call those our liquidity events, where suddenly you have a lot of extra liquidity assets, and you're like, I think I'm going to up my game on the collecting. And so you go from maybe a nice, like what I would have originally, I was in the World War II because my dad was a World War II soldier. So anything from his unit I was always looking to buy. He's dead, so I needed something, it made me feel better, you know, that I could kind of see where he was, you know, Battle of Bulge, all that kind of stuff. And the fact that he was disabled, he lost the lung in a war and was handicapped, I felt I owe it to myself to understand that for him, because he never would talk about it. I just saw the holes, but he would not talk about it. And when I started, you know, becoming more successful and I have more cash flow, is when I started to say, well, I'm going to get what I want to get. And so I live in Richmond. I collected Civil War, but I'm from Buffalo. I like French and Indian War. I like the American Revolution War of 1812. That really is my sweet spot, because that's what I remember as a kid. And so I started looking hard and buying it. And what I don't realize is at some point I will have to sell some of it or give it away. What are the complications? So I'm not going to lawyer you. I'm going to just talk very, very high level. Read the article if this is of any interest. But I want to talk about income tax, estate tax, and gift tax. We all know what income tax is because around April 15th every year we know we got to file something. We probably mutter some words when we send a check in and try to forget about it till the next year. But if you have a collection, and let's say you're alive and you're deciding, like, I need to do something with this collection, you're having the conversation with family, do I sell it? Is there interest in the family? Can I give it? Or do I put the little sticker on it and say, well, when something happens to me, that goes there, and you hope your family honors that, unless both of you are gone and then some stranger comes in, the executor lawyer who's not a family member, and doesn't know what that is because you never explained it to them. But the issues you have is when you start to sell the collection. Right now, we're just collectors. I'm going to assume we're all just collectors, so we buy stuff, we want to keep it and enjoy it. And occasionally we sell stuff to raise some funds to buy something else, right? But there comes a time, and as a tax lawyer, my job is to sue the IRS on a regular basis. I hope none of you work for the IRS will hold that against me. I have a lot of friends at the IRS. But the IRS will notice it because once you start selling 3 or 4 items in a year, you're no longer a collector in the eyes of the IRS. You're a dealer. Did you know that? When I think of a dealer, I think of guys that set up at the shows and they have really cool stuff. I want to have it, and they sell it, and I go home and I'm happy, right? Until the next show, and I do it all over again, right? Repeat and redo. But even if you just do 3 or 4 shows a year and you sell stuff, the IRS considers you to be a dealer. Well, what does that mean? So when you or I buy something as collectors and we sell it later, hopefully for as much we paid for it or maybe more, we call that capital gain. An asset you've held more than a year, and it has a special tax rate. It's usually lower than what you pay on your comp. But our collections, no matter what the genre is called a collectible. So it has its own special tax rate. It's 28% if it's a capital asset, which means a collection. But what if you started selling stuff 2, 3, 4 times a year? You are now a dealer. It's still a collectible, but it's no longer taxed at 28%. It's taxed at whatever your tax rate is for your regular income. So that's up to 37%. So I always take things to extreme because I want people to understand. So if I'm in the 37% bracket, my 28%, which I had in my budget, if something happened, it's really 37%. Plus, Virginia wants another 5 3/4%. If those of you, as a former New Yorker who has no desire to go back, if I lived in the city, I guess they take it all now based on the Democratic primary they just had. They want to have special tax rates. But I'm just saying is the IRS is very astute. And the other thing is you might not realize it, but you actually have to file an estate tax return. This is just there to torment me. But the estate tax return is called the estate tax return. It's a Form 706. And, oh, come on now, talk to me here. Help. Help. It's not moving. I owe you a drink tonight. But you actually have to put that inventory in your 706. And guess what you have to put with that inventory? It's fair market value. And whether you own it, you gift it, it's still going to be taxed or has an asset of your estate. Thank you. I'll get us on the right slide. And so if you haven't done any planning and you have an executor, they're required by law to file it, which means if they don't know the value because you didn't have a nice inventory with at least a purchase price and maybe a reasonable value you've picked, you're going to have it appraised. We'll talk a little bit about appraiser, what kind of appraisal needs it. IRS has special rules. And those rules apply whether you have it at your death or whether you give it away, there's our gift tax returns, or whether you make a charitable donation. They all have the same legal requirement which says it must be reported at fair market value. And it's not necessarily what the dealer told it was worth. It's not necessarily what you purchased. It's what it is on the date of your death. So I remember, Ken, you were talking about your first item you bought at 4 years old, and maybe you paid $6 for something then. Wonder what that's worth now. It's probably a lot more than $6. You know, I'm just saying is so. But the IRS doesn't care. They're going to require that to be done, and then they're going to base the tax rate on that. The current estate tax rate is 40%. Now, unless Congress gets their act together, it's going to go up to 60% on January 1 because the tax changes of 2017 expire. So I'm not a political person, so whatever kind of fruit punch you like to drink, if you like it, that's fine. But I'm just telling you, that's happening automatically. So if Congress doesn't do anything, your tax rates are going up. The 37% bracket, the highest ordinary income, what we get on our wages and stuff, is going up to 39.6. So estate taxes go back up to the 60%. So you hope that no matter what the political parties are, they will at least kind of try to work that out, because you think everybody would be upset with that. But you know, I don't have a lot of love for the politicians and you know their lack of planning. But again, if you are a collector and you sell something, you bought it, you know, guess what? You're supposed to pay sales tax when you purchase that, right? If you were selling it, you're supposed to collect the sales tax. And we all have been to the shows and bought the same stuff, and how many times do they actually charge you sales tax, right? I mean, they're supposed to. Now, some do, because they've probably been audited and they got hit with a sales tax from the state, and so now they add it to their invoice. Even if I'm at the Baltimore show, I pick something up and I drive it right to Virginia, I owe Maryland sales tax. Now, there's ways to get around that, you know, and we might touch on some of those to think. But again, as a collector, I have to pay sales tax. If I'm a dealer and I buy inventory, well, then I have a sale for resale exemption certificate because I'm registered with the state. I can buy it without paying the sales tax. So a lot of collectors think they're smarter than the average bear, and they say, well, just get me one of them, right? I can form a little LLC, you know, Craig Bell Cool Stuff LLC, and I register it and I get a sale for resale because, oh, I'm going to sell it. Well, I might when I'm dead, but I mean, at some point I'll have to sell. And so I can buy stuff, and when I buy something in an auction, I don't have to pay the sales tax. I give them the exemption certificate, I got the number, I'm all happy. Until I realize that I'm not a dealer. I'm not entitled to that exemption certificate. It's not so much boiled down to armor, firearms, but you will see on a regular basis, particularly with fine arts, antiquities, particularly in the New York City region, where some of the large auction houses have assisted people to buy very expensive artwork. We're talking multiple millions per item, and having it stored with an exemption certificate when they know that person is a collector and not a dealer. And so New York is now prosecuting people. Christie's has been prosecuted, Sotheby's across, and they're going after the buyers. And they're going after the employees of those auction houses for facilitating tax evasion. If you just Google it, you'll see it. Wall Street Journal has them in all the time. I read every single thing because I'm a tax lawyer, and I'm always looking at what the IRS is up to and how they enforce. And I also do a lot of state tax, and I'm always looking at that. And now, granted, are they going to come to Richmond, Virginia because I buy a really cool sword or something? They're probably not going to know until I'm dead, and then it'll be on a 706 unless I've disposed of it before, right? So anyway, the classifications are dealer, investor, collector. If you're a dealer, you can get the sales tax exemption, you can buy and sell, you can write off your automobile travel expenses, your purchase price is inventory, and so therefore it's a cost of goods sold. You're only reporting on the gain, but you're reporting as ordinary income. If you are an investor, it's just the same thing as if you're buying a stock or a bond or something else. I bought a sword for, let's say, $10,000. I kept it, and then I sold it later for $14,000. I had a $4,000 capital gain, which will be taxed at 28%. If I'm a dealer, it'll be taxed at my tax rate, 37%. And sometimes there's a little extra when they have the extra 3.8% surtax. So that's why I give you a little bit. I don't want to bore you on the dealer. It's in the art. But I tried to set out the points as how do you know if you're a dealer? I mean, because we've all had sold stuff. We're doing it in the room. I bet you 90% of we don't consider ourselves dealers in there. And will the IRS ever know? Who knows? I don't play the audit lottery game. I tell my clients, look, I know the rules. I can advise you on the rules. You have to make your own decision. And whether the IRS picks up on it, the way they pick up is if it turns out you have something real unique and someone writes an article about it. So I had an estate, and we closed out the estate with the IRS, filed the tax returns, and the lawyer, the estate tax auditor was a lawyer, and he was obnoxious. I mean, he was just an obnoxious individual. And he was reading, the Virginia Attorney General requires all public institutions to disclose their purchases during the year. And he's going down and he sees something for Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And it says a Severin Rosen painting of a bowl of fruit. $1 million. And he saw it from the estate of Astuteville, which is outside of Charlottesville and Albemarle County. And he says, I don't remember $1 million painting when I did the estate tax audit. So, and this is like 3 years after he closed it out. He pulls the file. And the statute had 3 days before it expired. He hit him up for an assessment on that extra $1 million, which with penalties and interest was about $700,000. And so as you can imagine, we're litigating. I, who knows nothing about fine art, learned everything I could learn about who the heck Severin Rosen is, found the person who wrote the catalog and used them as my expert witness, but they kept telling me, well, Craig, this thing is like 6 feet by 5 feet, and yes, there's a bowl of fruit, but don't you see that sun ray, and there's a little mountain range? I'm like, but it's a bowl of fruit. Who pays that? And she said, it's his masterwork. And it's like, oh, I wonder if the IRS knows that. We settled. But so they do find out. They read. They have people that do that. The IRS has their own employees who are credentialed appraisers. And even for the stuff that's not the high dollar value, they look at unique things. Because if you have something that's unique, what my treasurer could be like, yeah, I don't care about it. What you think is your treasure, yeah, it's not my interest, but it has value. They have people that can figure that out. Even with Doge, they have a budget to hire appraisers to advise them. If there's something, especially if you hit the $50,000 item of value, it is 100% audit rate. I just want you to know that. It's 100% audit rate. So for those of us who like pretty stuff, we've got to be careful. All right, we talked about dealer, investor, collector. I've kind of gone through the different rules. It's in the paper. Don't worry about it. I don't want to put you to sleep. There are times when a collector who's not a dealer or an investor, we have something called the hobby loss rules. And the rule there is, I'm not in the business of selling things, but from time to time I liquidate, and the IRS says, well, if you sell something for a profit and your expenses exceed your profit, you can only write off the expenses up to the amount of income. If you're a dealer, you can write it all off. And so everyone wants to say, well, I'm a dealer, I want to hate the loss. But there's rules. So I just point that out. I list out the rules in the article. So at some time, it makes for exciting conversation over a bourbon, sitting outside with your spouse, trying to explain it. We've talked a little bit about gift and estate tax. I just want to say that come January 1, 2026, unless Congress does something, we're going back to the way the rules were before 2017. The nice high exemption for gift and estate is coming down to $3 million, and $3 million is everything. That's not net, that's fair market value. You know, don't worry about your mortgage, we just want to know what the value is. It means you have to file a return, which means, and all estate tax returns are audited, 100% audit rate. So that's why a lot of people just don't realize, I just want to point it out, but all your assets, whether it's real estate, marketable securities, you own a business, it's not publicly owned business, it still has to be reported at fair market value, which means you've got to have someone come in and appraise your business, got to appraise your real estate. You can't just use the tax assessment, right? That's not considered an appraisal for the IRS. So you just need to kind of understand that, have those discussions with your spouse and figure out what can I do now to get organized. That's just kind of a capsulization. I really want to get into it's a follow on the communication is, but I understand my collection pretty well. I'm still learning on it, but I understand it because I have a love for it, and I'd rather do that than watch some piece of garbage TV. I could spend my time playing with a cool gun or a sword or doing research on the maker of a gun or something like that. That brings me joy. That brings me happiness. It lets my brainwaves be happy, and so when I come home from work, it refreshes me. And I suspect a lot of you, if not all of you, have the same thing with whatever your collecting interests are. But here's the issue where I get in trouble, and it's the inventory, provenance, and who can you go to for information. It's one thing if you're alive and you know this, folks. It's another if you happen to pass or you're incapacitated, stroke or something like that. Your spouse may not know. Have you taken any precautions for that? Have you written it down? They may know some of the collectors just from being at the shows, but that may not necessarily be the best planning. Again, if you have a lot of your assets tied up in the collection as opposed to stock or bonds, the IRS just looks at that return, they get the value and the tax applies, and if you don't have liquidity, they put liens on your collection and they can come and take it. And they can force a sale on it. And they're not as concerned about maximizing the dollars, they just want to make sure there's enough there to pay the tax, which is a little different than what all of us would want. And there are some things you can do to minimize. I put it in the article, just some ideas when you go home. If you are interested, talk to your advisors. It's not rocket science. You just want to make sure you get someone who understands, what's a family limited partnership, what are discounts, what are different things, and it's done. But if you don't do anything, you will definitely pay much more than you typically would be required. This is my bugaboo because this is where I fail miserably, right? The inventory. Like I said, I've got 4 closets full of 3-ring binders. Each 3-ring binder is on a different gun, a different sword. For the nice stuff, and then I've got a binder that just might have, a paragraph write-up, have a copy of if I got an invoice. Half the time it shows we don't get invoices. We don't necessarily want to have them because then the spouse sees that, But I might have like a printout of the canceled check and staple it to it because I'm a dinosaur, so everything's paper. Not ideal. I'm working on that. But when it's reported on the 706, that is the map for the IRS. They will follow that map and want to see everything and want to know what's happened. If you don't have it, the executor, they're personally liable if they don't report it and it's found out. So if that's a spouse, well, now you've just gotten your spouse in trouble. If it's a lawyer, they're not going to stick out their neck. If it's a trust company, they're not going to stick out their neck, right? They're worried more about making sure their licenses are okay. So common sense to the collectors, but these are the kinds of things I recommend you have when you do your inventories. It all varies depending on what the object is and the age of the object. When it comes to serial numbers, most of the things I collect don't have serial numbers, right? It was done earlier. But if it's silver, I'm more worried about is it hallmarked and dated by country origin, those stuff. So again, I have it listed out in the article, any references, provenance. Provenance and exhibition history is very, very important, both for the IRS and for if you insure your collection, because that can easily quadruple or more the value of an object. Photographs, ID tags, which I'm going to get out of the closet and dust off. But what happens if you have a house fire or something's stolen? I mean, it's not just to be the bag man for the IRS and do their job for them, and it's to keep your family safe. But if something happens, someone breaks in, that's your best proof. It's not as credible when you create it after the fact. But if you have the photograph before, you've got all those nice things that you've analyzed, the condition, the scuffs, the pristine condition, or no, it was clean 20 years ago. This has been restored. In my records, when I have done it, I will say who's restored it or repaired it as part of the record. Because it may be, if it's questioned, my wife, if she's the executor, would say, well, I know him, I'll go ask him, and he can hopefully remember that, and help us out if we're doing battle with the IRS. So paper versus digital. I am probably the worst person because I like paper. I like paper books. I'm not a digital book guy. I see the value of digitalized publications from a space management, but I just like paper. So what I do is I do both, which is defeating the purpose, but I'm getting better. But There's a couple programs listed here, Collectify and Collect It. I have the websites there, are two digital inventory systems. I have checked them both out preliminarily, and I will just tell you that I actually understand them, which means they have potential, because I'm an idiot with technology. And I can download or upload photographs, a copy of the appraisal, the purchase invoice, my notes, all that stuff. Now, I'm still scared to death about something called the cloud. You know, it's not those nice billowy things up there. And our firm, is heavily into the cloud, and I figure, well, they must know what they're doing. They're international. There's 1,200 lawyers all around the world. So I go play 20 questions with IT, and I understand about 10% of it, but they've gone to the cloud. So I talked to IT people who work with collections, and they said, well, Craig, their security on cloud is much better than what you would get with Microsoft or Google. All of them. He said, that's safer there. And that put me at ease. So I decided I'm going to investigate, and I'm not going to be scared about it. I'm always worried about hacking, and you hear how many times we got something in the mail that your credit card information has been hacked, and you get a free year of monitoring, right? And you hope that none of them are your banks or your tax numbers. But anyway, so that's all. It's all in there. The cost is exceedingly reasonable, under a couple $100 a year to include the online storage. I mean, that's a small investment to have that surety, especially for your spouse. So there are different types of appraisals. I won't do a dig dive on it, or you'll never get me to shut up. And probably if I've gone above, yeah, I'm already running long here, so I will speed it up. But the appraisal for insurance and the appraisal for the IRS are totally different appraisals, different standards, different requirements, and they're designed to measure different things. So anything to support what I call a tax function. So in my business, I litigate, what's the value of machinery and tools? What's the value of a privately owned business? What's the value of a 20% non-publicly traded security? I mean, so I have to have these valued, and so my client knows how to negotiate to sell it or buy more or whatever. And so the type of value, so when it's with a business, a lot of times say it's going concern value. Well, going concern is what's the value of a trained workforce and force, all when you say Kleenex, what do you think of? Are you thinking of the company Kleenex, or are you thinking of the tissue? Everyone thinks of the tissue. That tells you that brand is worth $1 bazillion. That has a value. And so you want to know that if you're selling your business, do I have something that's of value? So that's why I say there's lots of different types of appraisals. They're covered a little bit in the article, but why do we use them? People get divorced. I just had to do an appraisal for a business owner getting divorced, and he had about 70 guns. And they needed to be valued because the wife didn't want the guns, but she wanted the value of her half of those guns. And so I was hired by the court to appraise them so the court could make an order. Insurance companies, right? So anyway, it's in there. These are the IRS requirements. I'm going to go very quickly here. I just say go. If this turns you on, like I get excited about this, I really do. Then read the article. If not, keep it someplace with your spouse so she knows. But what I want you to take away from here is the fact that the IRS does have employees who are credentialed appraisers, and they also have a budget that was not cut by DOJ, to hire outside appraisers for high-value items. And they meet several times a year and discuss whether what you claimed on a tax return, gift tax return, estate tax return is supportable, legitimate, realistic, or it's a Gaga Land made-up number. And they do lots of audits. Again, this is the panel of experts they have that will look at it. They will never know who you are. They don't when the IRS brings these outside, they don't tell you who the person is. They don't associate the item with any particular person because they want to keep it blind. Because most of us probably know the significant, like if you collect a certain genre, you probably know all the key players of that genre. One of them could be one of these people. And you don't want them to know. right? Because, oh, he can afford it. Yeah, just jack it up. Let's leave it go. Or no, he always lowballs stuff, so let's jack it up some more. So again, I have it there. They meet twice a year. That last number is wrong. It's 1,000 to 3,000 works a year, not 300. Work includes art, statuary, guns, swords. Anything that's cool that has money is an item that they can look at, a collectible. Be careful on hiring an appraiser. I have a slide in here that says, these are the requirements, don't worry about it. You can read it in the article, but what I want to point out is who is not an appraiser, because this is where we get it. So the person that you bought the item from, even if they are also an appraiser, cannot be an appraiser of that item if it's going to be on a tax return, because they have an interest in it. They sold it to you for a price. They probably have a feeling like, I got to defend that price, whether it's too low, too high. The person receiving it, a lot of us know values better than most because we investigate, we research it because we're trying to be smart about it. No, you can't appraise your own stuff for the IRS. See, IRS is listening and they're just reinforcing that point. So I've kind of listed this out. What you do want to do, if it's for a tax, so gift tax return, estate tax return, income tax return, there has to be a credentialed appraiser. It has to be someone who is regularly appraising the type of item that they're rendering a value on. So for example, I do appraisals of antique armor and arms, and someone approached me about a samurai sword from the 13th century. And it was insured for about $1.5 million. And I said, well, that's really cool. I don't know anything about those. It's just not in my world of experience. But I said, let me introduce you to a gentleman in San Francisco who's Japanese, who's fluent in English. He spends half his time in Japan, half there, and he is the go-to person. And for something of that, you want to have the right kind of appraiser. So if you come to me and say, Craig, can you appraise my antique furniture? I said, can I? Sure. Will I? No. But let me introduce you to this guy who's a Southern furniture expert. He's great, and he can tell you everything you want to know. And so, like I say, I'm just pointing out, you got to hire the right kind of appraiser. So for our collections, you don't want to go to a general purpose collector if you have a firearm collection. You want to find someone who has some knowledge in that. It's just more legal stuff. It's in the article. These are all the requirements. Don't worry about it. Closing thoughts. Yes, we're towards the end. Kind of a summary point. What I want you to take away from here is, you notice I haven't talked too much about disposal, because I'm really talking about having the communication. But we all are familiar with auctions. We all buy from auctions. Some of us have sold from auctions. You might like some companies better than others. I've never sold anything through an auction, so I can't advise you on that. But I did do a lot of research on auctions. And at the end of the article, I have something called a due diligence checklist. In other words, if you are going to auction something off, or your spouse, or the estate, it's a list of questions that that person should be asking each auction house they're considering. What's market? What's a buyer's premium? Do you have exceptions to the buyer premium? Are the sales proceeds kept in escrow, or are they commingled with your general operating funds? We've all heard about some of the auction companies that are now bankrupt, and all the escrowed funds, the proceeds from your sale got mixed in with the operations, and they weren't there to pay out on the auction sales. Yes, they go to jail, but that still doesn't do you good if you were expecting a check for $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 and it's gone. So the list it's just at the end of the article. It's just a list by topic of what you ought to consider. What's your marketing plan for it? How many sales? What type of things? And again, it's fairly common sense when you have it in front of you. But when it happens and someone died suddenly and the spouse is overwhelmed with everything, they might, and someone said, well, we can just take it and we'll get it disposed of for you. I'm just saying is just stop for a few days. Go back, think things out, talk to who the beneficiaries are of the will, and make sure there's a meeting of the minds. So I cite an ASIC bulletin that has a whole article on that. It's available for free. Just go to the American Society of Armed Collectors.com, and you can find that issue. And I've just reproduced the actual checklist of questions you or your executor or your spouse should be asking before you turn something over to an auction company. always prepare to assist the family who may have zero interest or zero knowledge in the collection other than knowing mom or dad thought this was the coolest thing since, sliced bread, and it's cool, but it's not for me. So, you want to educate them so they don't make a mistake. There's just more there. It's all in the article. If you're going to hire people, again, I'm a lawyer, but I don't advise hiring lawyers unless they happen to have a passion for the collection and they have some knowledge, because their job is just to try to get this stuff out, right? If you have a trust or a foundation, that's different, because they can sit there in solution, and you don't, not under an immediate urgency is decide what should be a deaccession. It's just part of the collection. You've got people in there to analyze that. But for those of us that don't, in my house, there's 4 or 5 rooms, and under every single bed, there's cool stuff. And that's not the best way. Final thoughts. I've seen it all. Strong families that upon a death are now at war, all because of money or value, or they both want this painting, or I don't want the painting, I want the cash. Those are the things that the collector needs to have worked out in advance. And that includes talking with the beneficiary and saying, well, do you like this pistol? Did you know that Casimir Pulaski owned that pistol? And they look at you like, who's he? Right? Well, he's a really cool historian. He's the founder of the Continental Dragoons. Oh, I don't care. Well, that's good to know, because then I'll make sure you're not going to get that. It's going to be liquidated, or maybe I have someone else that should have it. Again, and those things don't happen overnight. You need to have those conversations. Again, good communication can avoid pitfalls. You're never going to have perfect communications, but it is hard to have communication. I've learned the hard way. And as I've told you several times today, I'm very fortunate my wife puts up with me. I'm very excited when I put the key in the lock and turn it, the door opens. She hasn't changed the locks. And I owe it to her for her to be informed, which means I got to do that because she doesn't have that interest. Now, you talk about antique pianos and stuff like that, and you can just flip the tables. And, I just like music, but, I don't care if it's a Steinway or a Baldwin, but it's different. So like I said, we all have our own interests. So I asked her to do the same. Is there any questions? I know I've gone long. Yes, sir.
Talk about tax valuations and appraisals versus insurance valuations. Is there a rule of thumb between the two?
Well, let me boil the standard down, and it sort of comes. So for a tax appraisal, it's at fair market value. So how do you determine what fair market value? It's not going to a dealer's table and say, hey, I got one just like that. How much is it? That's not fair market. It has to be a completed sale from a well-advertised public auction, which means it's going to be a lower price. Okay? For insurance, it's replacement cost, which means where do you normally find stuff, and what are the items that are the same currently offered for sale, and you're using that value, much higher value. So for insurance, you want to use asking retail price, because that's what they will pay you back. For tax purposes, if something is, let's say, fair market value is $10,000 and retail is $14,000, I don't think you want to put it on your tax return for $14,000 unless you're taking a deduction. But I mean, as far as and of course the appraiser won't do that. But that's so fair market value. Think of it like an orderly liquidated through a public auction. Insurance purpose is what would this cost for me to go out where I like to buy my stuff to get something current to replace it. Yes, sir. Any other questions? Charlie.
Right. All of us gray hairs contemplate a relocation at some point in our near or distant future as we ponder downsizing or retiring to a more pleasant physical climate. To that end, we are effectively choosing the state in which we may die. How much do state retirement, death taxes vary compared to others?
Sure.
And basically, what are good dying states and what are
Okay.
Yes.
Well, of course, I may not be good on
How much
that.
is the difference?
So I like I said, I'm not going to die. I've told my wife that, and that's when she.
All of us have experience.
Well, no, she might make me die. But I mean, so I'm from New York originally. You do not want to die in New York. I'm just telling you, you will pay. They have a special court called the Surrogates Court. Their sole mission is to make sure every frigging thing is taxed. And so, but there are, and when you hear about stuff that's not taxed, like income tax, well, there's a few states, Nevada, Florida, Texas, for individuals, not for businesses. So, but we're talking about death taxes. So many states, when they restructured the federal estate tax, many states jumped on and said, we're going to also remove our estate tax. So for example, in Virginia, we don't have a full estate tax. There's some de minimis amount, but it's not like it's tracked in like New York, Connecticut's an evil state. Massachusetts is an evil state. Illinois is an evil state. Solely, I'm talking taxes, okay? But I'm just saying, they're just notorious. But a lot of the states that don't have it, you might say, why would I want to go there? But a lot of the warmer client states get that, and they want to recruit people that have assets, and so they have to do that through making it worth their while by having lower income tax rates, having a much lower or no estate tax. You know, there's lots of ways a state can get their money that they need to provide services. And estate tax traditionally is not a large one for them. So it's an easy one a state can exclude. But I would say, I mean, you can Google, but I mean, my sense is, I know obviously Florida is a user-friendly state. Virginia is a user-friendly state. At one time, North Carolina was, I'm not sure anymore. South Carolina is a scary state, and you wouldn't have expected that. Their state tax department are exceedingly aggressive. Iowa, I love Iowa. They have cows and bisons and really nice people. Wouldn't want to die there. So, buyer beware. Yeah. Any other questions? I appreciate you sticking through. I realize this is a non-traditional topic, but I was asked to do it, and it is good information, and that's why I gave you the little article so that, you know, instead of having all this stuff like dumped on you, you can look at it later or put it with wherever other things when you start thinking about the topic. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
For more resources on collecting, research, high-quality photographs, and more, visit the KentuckyRifleFoundation.org. And to get a taste of what the Kentucky Rifle Foundation offers, visit their Facebook page under Kentucky Rifle Foundation for weekly posts and updates of fantastic original long rifles. I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Kentucky Rifle Foundation for sponsoring this short series of videos.
I was watching all this.